The proposal that shook the galaxy. The great hall of the alien palace was full of guests. Glowing lights floated in the air. Strange music played from invisible instruments. Tall aliens in shining clothes stood around, drinking bright-colored drinks and laughing. This was the night of celebration, the birthday of Princess Elira, daughter of the High Queen of planet Velexar. Suddenly, the music stopped. A human man walked into the center of the hall. His clothes were simple, not royal. His shoes were dusty. Some aliens gasped. Others looked angry. "What is he doing here?" Someone whispered. He was not invited. But the man, whose name was Jonah, did not stop. His hands were shaking, but his eyes were steady. He walked straight toward Princess Elira, who stood at the end of the hall in a long silver dress. She was beautiful, not just in looks, but in the way she held her head high, even as people judged her. Everyone was silent now. Jonah took a deep breath. He slowly went down on one knee. Gasps filled the room. In his hand, he held a small ring, not made of gold or diamonds, just a simple, glowing crystal he found on her planet. But it was special to them. Only she knew why. "Princess Elira," Jonah said in a soft voice, "I don't care who laughs. I don't care what they think. But I know what my heart feels, and my heart belongs to you." Then it happened. The crowd burst into laughter. High-ranking aliens laughed the loudest. Some covered their mouths. Others didn't bother. "He must be mad," someone shouted. "A human proposing to a Velexarian royal. This is a joke," another yelled. But Jonah didn't move. He stayed on one knee, looking up at her. Princess Elira didn't laugh. She didn't speak either. Her eyes began to water. Her lips trembled. And then she cried. Not loud sobs, not dramatic tears, just silent drops rolling down her cheeks. Her glowing hands came up to cover her mouth. The laughter stopped. No one knew what to say. Jonah stood slowly. He was afraid he had hurt her. He took a step back. "I'm sorry," he said, voice shaking. I needed to tell you." Elira reached for his hand. Gently, she touched his fingers. "Don't be sorry," she whispered. No one has ever been brave enough to love me in front of them." The entire hall froze. Even the High Queen leaned forward in her throne. "They all love my title," Elira said, now louder. "They love my power. But he saw me when no one else did." Gasps again, but no laughter this time. Some nobles looked uncomfortable. Others looked thoughtful. A memory flashed in Jonah's mind. He remembered the first time he met her. Not in a palace, not in this hall, but near the forest edge, where she had come to escape her guards and walk freely. He had helped her fix a broken translator device. They had talked for hours that day. He remembered the second time, when she shared a food called Zelith fruit with him. He hated the taste, but loved the way she laughed when he spat it out. He remembered how she cried the night she told him her life wasn't her own, that she was born into chains, just like her crown. They had been meeting in secret for weeks. And now here they were, no longer hiding. Jonah looked into her eyes. "I love you, Elira," he said, "not because you're a princess, but because you're you." Someone in the crowd dropped a glass. It shattered on the floor. "This is madness," an elder alien whispered. "Or maybe this is courage." Princess Elira turned to face the crowd. "You all laugh at him," she said, "but ask yourselves, how many of you have ever loved someone without fear?" No one answered. Jonah stood beside her now, not holding her hand, just standing next to her, quietly. The moment was heavy. And in that moment, something changed. One alien stepped forward, a royal guard. He lowered his head slightly. Not a full bow, but enough to show respect. Then another alien joined, and another. The queen remained silent, her face unreadable. But for Jonah, none of that mattered now. because Elira was smiling through her tears. And she whispered again, so only he could hear. "You didn't just shake this galaxy, Jonah. You shook my heart." The forbidden friendship. Before the proposal, before the tears, before the laughter in the royal hall, there was a secret friendship. It started in the quiet forest near the edge of Velexor's main city. Jonah was not supposed to be there. Humans were allowed only in assigned zones, safe places, tourist areas, working fields. The deep forest was off limits. But Jonah liked to wander. It helped him feel free. He was a simple technician, fixing alien machines for low pay. Most aliens looked down on him. They called humans soft skin, ground feet, and other names. He had learned to keep his head down. That day in the forest, he heard a sound like crying. He followed it. He moved carefully, pushing through glowing leaves and tall grass. Velexarian nature was wild and strange. The trees hummed. The wind smelled like fire and flowers. And the creatures, some were friendly, others not so much. Then he saw her. A girl with silver blue skin, sitting on a rock, hugging her knees. Her long braid touched the ground. Her dress shimmered like water. Even when she cried, she looked like a painting. But her face was not proud or royal. It was lonely. Jonah froze. He recognized her. She was Princess Elira, the most famous face on every alien broadcast. Everyone on Velexor knew her. They said she was cold, proud, untouchable. But she didn't look proud now. She looked broken. Jonah stepped back, but a branch snapped under his foot. She turned fast, eyes wide, glowing. "Who are you?" she said, standing up quickly. She wiped her tears away in a blink, like they were never there. Jonah raised his hands. "Sorry, I didn't mean to see anything. I was just walking." She stared at him, then at his clothes, his human face, his dirt-covered boots. "You're not a soldier," she said. "No," Jonah replied. "Just a repair guy. I fix food machines and lighting panels." Elira tilted her head. "Why are you here?" "I like the forest," Jonah said honestly. "It's quiet. Nobody yells at me here." A long pause. Then, to his surprise, Elira laughed. Just a little. "You're brave to walk here alone," she said. "This place has shadow crawlers." "What are shadow crawlers?" he asked. "They eat humans," she said with a smile. "Or so the stories go." Jonah chuckled nervously. "Great. I'll die doing what I love, getting lost." Elira looked at him strangely, not with hate, not with fear, just curiosity. "What's your name?" she asked. "Jonah. You? You know who I am." "Maybe," he said, "but that doesn't mean I know you." Elira went quiet. Then she sat down again on the rock and sighed. "You can sit, if you want." He sat. From that day, everything changed. They met again the next week, and again after that. Always in secret, always in the same forest. Elira would come with questions about Earth, about human music, about what it felt like to choose your own job or live in a small town. "I've never had a choice," she said once. "Everything is decided for me. What to wear, who to marry, how to speak." "That sounds like prison," Jonah replied. "Sometimes," she whispered, "it feels worse than prison." He brought her small things, a music chip from Earth with old songs, a sketchbook with human cartoons, a handmade wooden bird he carved himself. She loved the bird. "We don't make toys like this here," she said. "Everything is metal and glowing and cold." He didn't have much, but he gave what he could. And in return, she gave him something too. One night, as they sat near a glowing tree, she handed him a small stone. "This is a calm stone," she said. "If you press it, I'll hear you. But don't let anyone see it. They'll know we talk." Jonah held the stone like it was a treasure. "Why are you doing this?" he asked softly. Elira looked away. Because you talk to me like I'm just a girl, not a princess. But good things never stay hidden for long. Someone saw them, not clearly, just shadows in the trees, but enough to raise suspicion. The next day, Elira didn't come. Jonah waited for hours. 2 days passed, no sign of her. On the third day, his room was searched by alien guards. They found nothing, but the message was clear. Stop. He was scared, not for himself, but for her. Then the calm stone glowed. He pressed it. Jonah, her voice whispered, shaky. They locked my room. They say I was meeting a human rebel. They think you're dangerous. Me? He whispered back. I'm not a rebel. I know, she said, but they don't care. They're planning to send you away, off-planet. Then I'll run. No, she said quickly. Don't. Listen to me. I have a plan. But it's dangerous. Her voice cut off. The calm stone went dark. Jonah stared at it, heart racing. For the first time in years, he was afraid. Truly afraid. But not of dying. He was afraid of losing her. The alien trials begin. 3 days. Jonah had not seen the sun in 3 days. The cell was small, cold, and smelled like wet stone. It had no bed, no chair, just a curved wall and a silver light that never turned off. He didn't know what time it was, or what day it was. He only knew that he had been taken. They came at night. Alien guards in black armor had broken into his small apartment. They didn't speak. They didn't explain. They just scanned his room, grabbed him, and dragged him away. No questions, no warning. Now Jonah sat in the middle of the floor, arms around his knees, staring at the door. He had done nothing wrong. He was not a rebel, not a spy. He was just in love. But on Velexar, that was enough to be a crime. The door hissed open. A tall alien guard stepped in. His eyes glowed red under his helmet. Stand, the guard said. Jonah stood slowly, legs weak. You will be judged today, the guard said, by the royal court. They walked in silence through long stone halls, past glowing walls and strange alien statues. Jonah's heart beat louder with every step. They entered the judgment chamber, a huge room, round like a dome. Hundreds of aliens sat in tall chairs circling the center. Each one wore different robes, showing rank and house. In the center was a raised platform, and on it, the High Queen herself sat on a throne made of black crystal. And beside her stood Elira. Her face was calm, but her eyes were red. She had been crying. Jonah's hands were chained. He was pushed into the center of the room. A voice echoed from above. Mechanical, emotionless. Human citizen Jonah of Earth, it said, you are charged with unauthorized forest entry, unlawful communication with a royal, and disruption of galactic peace. The crowd murmured. Jonah looked up at the queen. I didn't break any peace, he said, voice quiet. I only talked to her. Talked. One of the alien lords laughed from his chair. You corrupted her. Another one added, this is why humans must stay in their own sectors. They are weak, emotional, and dangerous. Jonah stayed calm. I never forced her to talk to me, he said. She came to the forest on her own. We just became friends. The queen's eyes narrowed. Princess Elira, she said coldly. Is this true? Elira took a breath. Yes. Gasps. I left the palace many times, Elira said. I met him in the forest. We spoke. We shared stories, and I gave him a calm stone. Louder gasps now. Some aliens stood in anger. He manipulated you, one shouted. He tricked you with lies. Another yelled. But Elira raised her voice. No, she said. He listened. He respected me. He never asked for anything. The queen stood slowly. You speak with emotion, daughter. But your emotions may blind you. Or maybe yours blind you, Elira whispered. The room went silent. Jonna looked at her with wide eyes. She was risking everything. The queen turned toward the center. The court must decide. Do we exile this human, or remove him permanently? A quiet wave of tension filled the air. I vote exile, said one noble. I vote execution, said another. Jonna closed his eyes. This was it. But then, a soft voice spoke from the far corner. I asked to speak. An old alien stepped forward. His skin was gray, marked with time. He was known as Elder Venkai, one of the oldest and most respected voices on Velexar. The room made way for him. I have lived long, he said. I have seen war, peace, betrayal, and love. He looked at Jonna. This human came to our world with no power, no army, no plan. And yet, he stands here today, not as a soldier, but as a soul brave enough to care. A few aliens nodded slowly. We punish fear, not crime, Venkai said. But what crime is here? That a girl spoke freely, that a boy listened kindly. The queen's eyes flickered, secrets of her past. The stars above Velexar looked peaceful, but inside the royal tower, Princess Elira stood alone by her window, her hands resting on the glass. Her glowing hair fell over her shoulders. She wore no crown tonight, only a plain robe, the color of moonlight. Outside, the city lights blinked like tiny fires. Alien ships moved silently through the sky. Guards stood by the gates below, watching, always watching. She sighed. The wind whispered through the cracks in the stone, carrying voices from long ago, voices she could never forget. You were born for duty, not dreams, her mother had told her when she was a child. Elira remembered sitting on a silver chair, too tall for her small legs. She had asked if she could go to the gardens, just to pick a flower. Princesses do not pick flowers, the queen had said coldly. They are given to them. Years passed, but the rules never changed. Every step she took was planned. Every word she said was practiced. Every smile was watched. And behind every kindness was control. Elira's only escape was the hidden room behind her bedchamber, a place no one knew about except her. She had found it by accident as a child. A loose panel, a dark tunnel, and a space filled with old books and broken toys. Sometimes she would sit there for hours, pretending she was just a girl, not a princess, not a tool, just Elira. And now, all these years later, she was back in that hidden room again. But this time, she wasn't alone. Jonna was with her. This place is amazing, Jonna said softly, brushing dust off an old pillow. It's the only place that feels real, Elira replied. She lit a small glow lamp. The light danced on the stone walls, revealing shelves of forgotten stories and strange alien dolls. You played here as a child? Jonna asked. Yes, she smiled sadly. When I still believed I had a choice. He sat beside her. You do have a choice. You proved that when you helped me escape. She looked down. I broke every rule for you, she whispered, and I'd do it again. A heavy silence followed. Do you want to know the truth, Jonna? She asked suddenly. Yes. My life is a lie. Jonna's eyebrows raised. What do you mean? She stood up and walked to a dusty shelf. From behind a stack of books, she pulled out a crystal tablet. It glowed faintly when she touched it. This, she said, holds all my real memories, not the fake stories told to the public, not the lies my family shows the world. She handed it to him. He tapped the crystal. A hologram appeared in the air. A younger Elira, maybe 7 or 8 years old, sitting in a dark room. Her eyes were red from crying. Her voice shook. Today they told me I must marry Lord Velen's son when I turn 15. I don't want to. I said no. They punished me. They say my feelings don't matter. Only Velexar matters. Only the bloodline matters. Jonna paused the recording. He looked at her, heart aching. This is awful. Elira nodded. I kept these journals so I wouldn't forget who I really am." Jonah's voice was quiet. "And who are you, Elira?" She smiled, tears forming in her eyes. "I'm someone who wants to be free." He took her hand gently. "We'll find a way. Together." She didn't speak. Instead, she pressed her forehead gently against his. Alien tradition. A sign of deep trust. But even as they sat in that hidden room, something dark moved in the palace. A shadow figure watched the guards from a rooftop nearby. General Kaith. He was no friend of Elira. He believed in power, not peace, and he had long hated the idea of humans living freely on Vilexar. To him, they were insects, useful, but weak. And now, rumors had reached his ears. The princess was meeting a human boy. In secret. If this is true, he whispered to himself, she has betrayed the royal line. He tapped a device. A silent signal went out. Soon, soldiers would search the tower. Elira didn't know it yet, but time was running out. Back in the secret room, Jonna was looking at another memory. Elira as a teen, standing in front of a closed door. "They locked me in again," her voice said. "Because I spoke up in council. Because I said maybe humans deserve rights. My mother didn't even look at me. She just waved her hand and turned away. I feel invisible." Jonna looked at Elira. "You were brave even then," he said. "I was scared," she whispered, "but I couldn't stay silent." Suddenly, the calm stone in Jonah's pocket glowed red. "Danger," it pulsed. Elira's eyes widened. "They found us." Footsteps echoed above. Boots. Many of them. "They're here for me," Jonah said, standing up. "No," Elira replied firmly. "They're here for us." She grabbed a hidden panel in the wall. A narrow tunnel opened. "Come on." "Where does it lead?" "To the Sky Garden. There's a secret path. We'll be safe there." They ran, hand in hand, the past behind them, the future uncertain. But for the first time in both their lives, they were running toward freedom. War in the sky. The sky above Vilexar was not peaceful anymore. Ships flew like angry birds across the clouds. Red lights blinked on war cruisers. Alarms rang through the city. Guards shouted into their comms. Search drones flew low over buildings. Something was wrong, very wrong. And in the middle of it all, Jonah and Elira ran through the garden tunnels under the palace. "How far is the exit?" Jonah asked, breathing hard. "Not far," Elira said. "Once we reach the Sky Garden, I know a path to the outer port. There's a ship hidden there." "Your ship?" "No," she said. "A friend's." They turned a corner and reached a metal ladder. Elira climbed first. Jonah followed. Above them, they could hear boots. Lots of boots. "They're tracking us fast," Jonah whispered. "We need to fly before they close the sky," she said. They reached the surface. The Sky Garden. It was once a peaceful place, where royal guests walked among floating plants and glowing trees. Now it was filled with smoke and fire. Alien soldiers were already there. "They've blocked the west exit," Elira shouted. Jonah grabbed her hand. "We'll make a new one." He looked at a small metal orb on his belt, something he stole from the Royal Guard's tech lab weeks ago. A flash bomb. Not meant to kill, just to blind. "Close your eyes," he warned. He threw the orb. Flash. The garden exploded with white light. Soldiers shouted in pain. The air sizzled. Jonah and Elira ran through the confusion. They slid down a hidden slope, behind a tall tree. A silver gate opened with Elira's voice scan. Beyond it, a small scout ship. Sleek, fast, silent. "Get in," she yelled. Jonah jumped into the pilot's seat. "You trust me to fly." "You fixed garbage machines in the city," she grinned. "You're perfect." He smiled. No pressure. The ship lifted off. Guards reached the gate, but too late. They flew into the sky, above the palace towers, above the blinking lights, above the noise. But the peace lasted only seconds. Alert, the ship's system said. Royal fleet approaching. Jonah looked out. Ships. 10 of them. Heading straight for them. They'll shoot us down, he muttered. Not if I send the royal code, Elira said. She opened the control panel and typed fast. A symbol blinked. Royal clearance. The enemy ship slowed. But then, the clearance was denied. Someone blocked me, she said. Someone with higher power. Your mother? No, she said, her voice low. General Keith. The name tasted like poison. He had always hated her ideas, hated humans, hated freedom. And now, he had the power to erase them from the sky. Hold on, Jonah said. I've flown junkers through asteroid storms. I can do this. The ships began firing. Bright beams cut through the clouds. Jonah swerved hard. The small ship flipped and spun. Lasers missed them by inches. Elira held onto the seat, heart racing. You said no pressure, she shouted. That was before the sky became a battlefield, Jonah replied. He pushed the ship down into the lower sky layer. Clouds hissed as they passed through. Behind them, 2 ships followed. They're faster, Elira warned. But we're smaller, Jonah said. And I know a trick. He turned the ship sharply toward a tall mountain range. Velexar's razor cliffs. No pilot dared fly through them. Except Jonah. Jonah, that's suicide, Elira shouted. Nope, that's freedom. He pulled the ship low. The cliffs appeared fast, giant black rocks with sharp points. The chasing ships fired again. One beam scraped the side of Jonah's ship, sparking wires. Warning, the ship's voice said. Damage detected. Thanks for the update, Jonah yelled at it. They entered the cliffs. The alien ship slowed, afraid. But Jonah pushed forward, dodging rocks, spinning through tight turns. His hands moved like lightning. Elira stared at him in awe. She had never seen someone fly like this. Not with computers. Not with math. Just with feeling. The cliffs ended in a wide valley. A safe zone. Jonah landed the ship beside a waterfall. They both sat in silence, breathing hard. Finally, Elira spoke. You're insane. You're not the first to say that, he said with a grin. Then her face changed. Sadness. He saw it in her eyes. What is it? He asked. This, us, it won't stop them, she said. They'll hunt us. They'll destroy any place we hide. Jonah looked away. Then we stop hiding. Elira looked at him. We fight. He stood up and opened a small panel near the back of the ship. Inside was a dusty transmitter, an old human signal unit. When I first came to Velexar, he said, I hid this. I didn't think I'd need it. Who will it call? She asked. Friends, he said. Other humans. Some work as cleaners. Some fix pipes. Some fly garbage ships. But they're brave. He turned it on. A red light blinked. Message sent. A few hours later, they saw them. Ships rising from the horizon. But not alien ships. Human ones. Not fancy or shiny. Just simple, strong machines built by survivors. A voice came through the speaker. This is Captain Milla. Jonah, is that you? He smiled. You came. You saved my brother in the factory fire, remember? She said. Of course I came. One by one, the ships landed. Humans stepped out, old and young, men and women, engineers and pilots. Even some alien workers who believed in peace. Elira looked around. A small army. What now? She asked. Jonah looked at her. Now we show them we're not afraid. Elira reached into the ship and pulled out her royal badge. She placed it on the ground and crushed it under her boot. I'm not their princess anymore, she said. I fight for choice, for love, for freedom. The wind blew gently. Somewhere far away, the royal army prepared for battle. But now, they weren't the only ones with power. Because this wasn't just a fight between soldiers. This was a war for hearts. And it was about to begin. The Royal Judgment. The Hall of Echoes was the most feared place in the entire Velixarian Empire. No one laughed here. No one smiled. The walls were carved from living stone that repeated your voice back to you in whispers. Old stories said the walls remembered every lie ever told inside this chamber. Jonah stood in the center. His hands were cuffed in glowing chains. His face was bruised, his shirt torn, but his eyes still burned with fire. Across from him, Princess Elira stood on a high platform, alone. She was no longer wearing royal clothes. Her hair was tied back simply, and a long gray robe wrapped around her shoulders. Beside her sat the High Queen, cold, silent, and angry. The judgment had begun. Human Jonah of Earth, a voice echoed through the hall. You stand accused of high crimes against the crown of Velixar. The speaker was Counselor Grell, a three-eyed alien with a voice like a drum. You are charged with theft, invasion of royal lands, and worst of all, corruption of a royal bloodline. The word corruption made some of the alien lords hiss in disgust. Jonah said nothing. His jaw was tight. His heart was pounding, but not from fear. From anger. From injustice. He looked up at the Queen. "Do you want me to speak?" he asked. "This is not your time," she replied coldly. Then she turned to her daughter. "Elira," she said, "you were born to protect Velixar, but you broke the law. You ran away. You helped this creature." She didn't say the word man. Just creature. The Queen continued. "You betrayed your family, your people, your future." Elira looked down, but only for a second. Then she raised her head and spoke clearly. "I betrayed nothing." A wave of whispers spread through the council. Elira stepped forward. "You say I helped him," she said, "but he helped me. He helped me remember who I am." The Queen narrowed her eyes. "You are a princess." "No," Elira replied. "I'm a person." Another shock passed through the chamber. Elira turned toward the gathered nobles. "You all talk about honor, about duty, about purity, but you've forgotten what those words mean." She pointed at Jonah. "This human risked his life to save mine. Not once, but many times. Not for power, not for gold, not even for thanks, but because he cared." A noble shouted, "He corrupted you." "No," Elira snapped. "He freed me." Her voice rang through the chamber. Even the walls whispered back, "He freed me, freed me." The Queen stood now. Her voice was cold like ice. "You love this human?" "Yes," Elira said. "Enough to give up your name?" Elira didn't blink. "Yes." The Queen nodded. "So be it." She clapped once. The floor beneath Jonah shifted. A beam of light circled him. "He shall be executed at sunset," the Queen said. "What?" Elira shouted. "He has committed treason," the Queen replied. "And now so have you." Guards moved toward Elira, but before they could reach her, a noise exploded from above. Boom! The ceiling cracked open. Dust rained down. And from the hole, ropes dropped. Figures slid down fast. Humans, rebels, and even Velixarian workers, those who believed in change. They had come to fight. Mila, the human pilot, fired a stun blast into the air. "Step away from them," she shouted. Chaos filled the judgment hall. Blasts, sparks, shouting. Jonah's chains unlocked. Elira grabbed his arm. "Come on." But the Queen shouted again, louder than the noise. "Stop." Everything froze. She raised her hand. Every weapon in the room was pulled upward by a magnetic field. No one could shoot. No one could move. Only her voice was free. "You want to destroy tradition," she said. "You think love is stronger than empire." Jonah stepped forward. "Yes," he said. The Queen stared at him. and in her eyes. For just a second, there was sadness. Then she said quietly, "Prove it." She tapped her throne. A second platform rose from the floor. 2 chairs, a strange glowing ring between them. "Sit," the queen ordered. Jonah and Elira did. A transparent field surrounded them. A machine lit up. "This is the test of bond," the queen said. "It reads hearts, not lies. If your love is true, it will shine. If not, you both die." Gasps. Elira reached for Jonah's hand. "Ready," she whispered. He nodded. "Always." The ring began to spin. Colors danced between them. Red, green, blue, gold. Their memories were shown in the air like a dream. The first meeting in the forest, the shared music, the carved bird, the secret room, the kiss under the broken stars, the escape, the flight, the pain, the hope, the love. And then, the ring glowed white. A perfect white light filled the chamber. So bright, everyone had to shield their eyes. Even the queen. The test was complete. The machine spoke, bond true. No one could speak. Even the walls whispered, "True, true." The queen sat down slowly, her eyes closed, and when she opened them, her voice had changed. "Guards," she said, "release them." "What?" Counselor Grell yelled. "This is madness." "This is law," the queen said. The bond was true. Jonah stood up, still holding Elira's hand. "So we can go?" he asked. The queen nodded. "But understand this, human. Love may be strong, but it is not safe." Jonah smiled. "It never is." And then, for the first time in the history of Velexer, a human and a royal princess walked out of the Hall of Echoes, hand in hand. And no one stopped them, not even the queen. The day she said yes, they stood under the same stars where it all began. The great hall of Velexer was once again full. Alien nobles stood in rows, dressed in glowing robes. Music played, soft and cold. Servants floated through the air on hover plates, carrying food and drink. Banners hung from the walls, symbols of royal blood and galactic pride. And in the middle of it all, Jonah stood alone. Again. No royal clothes, just a clean, simple shirt and dark trousers. His hands weren't shaking this time. His eyes were clear. He took one deep breath, and then dropped to one knee. Gasps filled the room. Again. The nobles whispered, again. "He's back. He dares try again." How foolish can a human be? But Jonah didn't care. Because this time, he knew. She would say yes. A week had passed since the judgment. After the bond test proved their love was true, the queen had allowed them to walk free. But not everyone agreed with her decision. Some nobles resigned. Some threatened to leave the council. Others whispered of rebellion. But none dared move. Not after the bond test. Not after the whole empire saw that love could break walls thicker than stone. And so, with fear and fire still in the air, Jonah did something no one expected. He asked the queen for permission to propose. Again. In public. In front of everyone. They laughed once. He told her, "I want them to understand now." The queen had stared at him for a long time. Then slowly she nodded. And now, the hall was silent again, like it had been before. But this time, something was different. When Jonah looked up, he saw her. Elira, walking toward him. Not in chains, not as a prisoner, not even as a princess, but simply as herself. Her robe was white, made of soft light. Her glowing braid was undone, falling freely across her shoulders. Her face was calm, but her eyes were full of emotion. The nobles parted as she walked. No one stopped her. No one dared. She stepped in front of Jonah. He looked up at her. Then he spoke. "You cried the first time," he said softly, "but I didn't know why. She smiled. I cried because I thought it was a dream, and I didn't want to wake up. The crowd watched in silence, some curious, some angry, some unsure, but all quiet. Jonah raised the same ring, still simple, still glowing, a crystal from the forest where they first met. Elira, he said, not because of duty, not because of rules, not because it's allowed now, but because I love you. His voice trembled a little. Will you say yes? Not to be my princess, but just to be with me. Elira didn't answer at first. She looked around, at the nobles, at the High Queen, at the council, at the crowd who once laughed, now watching closely. Then she turned back to Jonah and said just 3 words. I already did. She took the ring, slipped it on, and knelt beside him. 2 people, equal, together. The nobles gasped again, but it was different now. It wasn't shock. It was wonder. And then someone clapped, softly, a slow, steady clap. Everyone turned. It was the queen, standing, applauding. Behind her, the counselor who once wanted Jonah executed now lowered his head in quiet respect. And slowly, the room began to change. One by one, the aliens began to clap. Soft at first, then louder. Not all of them, but enough. Enough to show that something had shifted in the galaxy. A wall had cracked, a rule had bent, and love had stepped into the light. The wedding was simple, not by tradition, not by royal custom, but by heart. They stood beneath the twin moons of Velexar, far away from the palace, in the forest where they had first met. A small circle of friends gathered. Mila was there, in a patched pilot's jacket. Some Velexarian workers stood with flowers made of light. Even a few royal guards came, not in uniform, but in peace. Jonah wore a gray suit, nothing fancy. Elira wore a dress made of forest leaves and soft starlight. No crown, no titles, just her. We are not 2 worlds anymore, she said during her vows. We are one heart, Jonah replied. They sealed their bond not with a kiss, but with the ancient Velexarian way. They pressed their foreheads together, and their thoughts joined. No secrets, no lies, only love. And the stars above shone brighter than ever before. Back in the cities, things did not change overnight. Some aliens still looked down on humans, some still whispered, but change had begun. A human was now part of the royal family. Not by force, not by war, but by choice, by love. Schools began to teach the bond test as a sign of peace. Workers of both species began sharing meals. A statue was built in the center of the city, 2 hands, 1 human and 1 alien, holding a glowing ring. And at the bottom of the statue, words were carved in both languages. They laughed when he proposed, until she cried, and the galaxy remembered what love means. Many years later, a child stood by that statue, half human, half Velexarian. She looked up at her father, Jonah, and asked, "Is it true? They really laughed at you?" Jonah chuckled. "Oh yes," loud and long. "Were you scared?" He smiled. "Yes." "So why did you do it?" Jonah looked down at her, eyes gentle. "Because when love is real," he said, "you stand up, even if the whole galaxy laughs." And then Elira walked over, kissed her daughter's head, and added, "And sometimes when you do, the galaxy listens." The stars above Velexar sparkled softly, and love continued to grow, not in palaces, not in rules, but in hearts, just like theirs.